Welcome back to Property Chat with Roland Taylor. Some of you may remember that I was the Director of Statewide Conveyancing for 23 years in charge of the Property Law Division, and more recently I'm now a lecturer at the College of Law. With me today I have Lloyd Stanger from McKays Solicitors. He's the Director in charge of the Property Law Division, including conveyancing, and I have Bethel Campbell, a Director of Statewide Conveyancing, in charge of the Property Law Division at Statewide Conveyancing. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Roland.
So today we want to talk about the new REIQ contract. Yes.
Just one, Roland.
Just one.
Just one.
I remember when I first started practicing, they would change it every 8 to 10 years, right? And that's back in the 90s. Now it's like almost an annual thing, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, annually. I think we're up to the 19th edition.
Yeah,
and now we're going to start again. So this is the first edition now. We're back to the start.
I guess going from 19 to 1 doesn't look so bad.
No,
it doesn't look as though they're changing it every year.
No.
It's like, no, it's only first or second edition.
Yeah.
Yes. All right, so there's some changes. And I guess the first change is, and you touched on this, guys, it's not just for house and land or corporate.
It's for it's for everything residential. So there's one form for residential and there's one form for commercial. So effectively, everyone's using one form where they're sitting in either of those markets.
And look, to me that sounds like a good thing.
Yep.
Because when I used to look at the contracts, it wasn't a huge difference. So I often thought, why don't they just have one? But what are your opinions?
No, I think it's great because so many times, like you've seen, particularly like junior staff or newer agents, and they'll start to prepare a contract of sale, and then halfway through they realise, oh, actually, it's a block of land in a body corporate, it's got a shared driveway or something really. Whereas now you can't stuff it up. You're doing the one contract, and then your body corporate stuff is just a small component of that. So I think it's going to simplify things across the board.
I can remember numerous times receiving contracts for units, and it's on a house and land contract.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Change.
So that is good change.
Good change.
So let's look at the changes that are going to affect the people of the coalface, the agents. So the first one is GST.
I was really surprised actually when I saw these new contracts, and for most of the agents out there, a lot of them actually haven't seen the new contracts that have come out, and it may just be on the 1st of August. It's actually going to be at a bit of a surprise when they see it. So I'm hoping by us having a chat about this today, they're actually going to get a little bit of a jump and be able to understand what's in there. When I first saw it, there's now this huge section on GST. And that surprised me because that's a really difficult concept to often understand. I'm not sure on your team, Lloyd, but you'll have a junior lawyer or a 2 or 3 year lawyer. They're only just being able to understand the GST consequences. So for an agent now to have to actually make a selection on GST can seem really overwhelming. But
particularly in the residential sense.
Yeah, that's right. But I think what we've found when we've gone through it, once we talked everyone through it now, it's actually not as scary as most people are going to see.
And I think the biggest issue from the outset when you get this, the format is similar, but it has changed quite substantially. So I think there's a bit of a shock value when you first receive it and go, holy, they've changed all of it. It has some quite common elements that come across. It's just that it's laid out in a different way. So I think in terms of, if I can say to everyone, take the time, read it. Don't get too freaked out when you first see it because it is quite substantially different in terms of what it looks like. But those questions that we're going to ask are probably fundamentally relatively the same. For the most part, if you're buying a residential property, then GST is going to be input taxed and you're not going to have too much to worry about. But there are some sort of quirks.
Probably for the agents, there's going to be the easy ones.
Yep.
And there's going to be the ones where they're going to need
some guidance.
Some guidance.
Definitely.
All right. So, Lloyd, perhaps if you can just do a quick explanation of the easy ones. I think you've to a certain extent already done that. And then just do a quick explanation on the ones where they need to see guidance.
Yeah. So I guess our easiest one is that there's no GST payable and the purchase price is inclusive of any GST. That will be in the case where you've got a buyer buying an existing dwelling. It's been there for 3 or 4 years, it's not brand new, there's no issues with it being classed as a residential dwelling. or a unit or whatever the type of property it is, as long as it's not brand new and it's not vacant land, we're probably out of the question altogether. Those other two factors which I just focused on in terms of if it's brand new or if it's vacant land, that's when there can be a question mark as to whether or not there's any GST payable. But realistically, that's going to be another question then to the seller to be, are you registered for GST? So there's a bit in it, and I guess if agents are coming up with those sort of coming to those queries, that they probably need to be asking those questions and then directing the seller to their solicitor or their accountant to help answer the GST questions in relation to this. But from 9 out of 10 sales, it's probably not going to apply.
So Lloyd, just to summarise that, if an agent's selling a property, there's a residential dwelling on it, it's an existing residential dwelling, so it's not brand new, right? Then there's no GST issue, we don't have to worry about it. If it's vacant land or it's a brand new dwelling,
and the seller is registered for GST.
The seller is registered, they need to seek guidance, and that's when things like margin scheme, going concern, farmland are going to come in.
Yep.
And that's something where, that's a solicitor's call, or an accountant's call, not an agent, so we're not really going to go into any more detail on that.
And what we are hoping, of course, is that on the 1st of August, the Form 6s are changing as well. And so a lot of the information around the GST, that's going to be a question when they're actually listing the property for sale. So when the seller completes the Form 6, and if they say, yes, I'm registered for GST at that point, the agents are then going to be fully aware to say, right, we need to now at this point seek some other guidance from their accountant or their solicitor, because it may determine then how they're going to market the property as well. If they need to add GST onto the price, well, that's going to be a whole thing. Or if they need to comply with the farmland exemption, that's going to be a slightly different buy that they're going to be looking at. So these aren't going to be shocking questions when we're negotiating a contract at 10 a.m. on a Saturday. These are going to be questions that will come up right from that list stage, and the agent at that point can then seek the guidance and push the seller to those professionals to ensure that when we get to contract stage, we've already got the information that we need to complete it correctly.
And GST is a tricky issue.
It is.
I came across one the other day where an agent rang me and the seller was registered for GST, but it was an existing dwelling. And the solicitor was going, oh no, you've got a whole GST pack. And I rang your office, Bethel, and said, look, I spoke to one of your senior solicitors and she confirmed, well, my opinion, there was no GST to be withheld. So I think it's, once again, and when this issue comes up, talk to someone who knows what they're on about, an experienced solicitor in the area.
Definitely.
On that though, I guess in terms of GST, is that they are two separate regimes in terms of, we've always had to deal with the GST withholding, and this separate concept now of GST is actually the supply on the property. So I guess by way of a quick example of that, in some circumstances the GST withholding may apply even though there's no GST actually applicable on the sale. And that's just the lovely quirk of that legislation. So like your ATO clearance certificates that everyone's now used to, even though there's no capital gains tax on the sale, everyone still has to do the required form, and so the GST withholding's a little bit different to that. But again, any dramas on it, then contact the solicitor and make sure that they're aware of it from the seller's perspective.
It's important to note too that if there is a fallback, that if you don't complete it, then the purchase price does just include GST, which has always been what it was previous to this anyway. So if you do forget about it and you're not quite sure and you just leave it blank, we're going to be left with the same regime that we had now, where the purchase price just includes the GST if it applies.
Land tax. I haven't seen this in the contract before.
No, this is a nice new one. So again, the two big changes are...
Nice.
bad choice of words using it nice. It was a nice surprise, I might say. So the two big changes that sort of come in are that GST, but then the land tax side of things as well. So now the sellers and the agent need to make a determination on how they're actually dealing with land tax. So there's three options in the contract, whether or not land tax isn't an issue, or whether we're actually going to look at some adjustments, and then we may need to make a selection on that. Most people probably don't quite understand how land tax works, but at the end of the day, it's just a tax that some people have to pay if they own a lot of property, in a nutshell. So if the question when you're asking your sellers, do you pay land tax? If they're not sure, they're not going to pay land tax because it's not something that you're going to realise you do or don't pay. So for most people, again, it's just going to be, it's a non-issue. So whilst it seems scary, for most people selling the residential home that they live in, it's not going to be anything that they need to complete. And again, it's like the GST that if you don't complete it, then it's not an issue at all. And it's not something, it stays the same as it is now, that the seller pays their own land tax. So.
Yeah, so currently the seller would just pay their own land tax, and I think that was a great regime. I don't see why you would change it. So I'm a bit bemused by this actual change. So I guess my suggestion, and disagree if you feel otherwise, is that if you have a seller that says, no, we want to do an adjustment, then you need to flag that with your buyers.
Definitely, and I would even be saying to you, like if you've got a seller that's right that says, well, I do pay land tax and I want the buyer to pay that, it's going to be actually very hard to convince a lot of buyers that they're actually going to want to pay that. Most buyers are going to take the opinion and say, well, that's the seller's tax because they have so much property. That's not a problem for me, I don't want to do it. So again, even if you've got a seller that says, I want to do it, you may never get it across the line. So it's certainly going to be a discussion when you say to your seller at that point, if they say, I pay land tax, and yes, I want the buyer to pay it, the first thing you're going to say is, you need to go and get some separate advice on that. Talk to your solicitor, talk to your accountant, and get that right advice, because I know in my office, if I had a contract that came in and it was just a house that they did have to pay land tax on and my buyer's going to pay it, I'm going to change that straight away and say, of course I'm not going to pay that. So most buyers already feel like they're paying enough for properties as it is, and let alone adding a tax on it. So.
And I guess I would be recommending to that buyer before they sign that with that in there, that they find out somewhat what that seller's liability is. So realistically, if you've got a seller that's pushing for a land tax adjustment, your probably next question is going to be, well, what is the land tax payable on that property?
I felt that the change was brought in potentially because it's something that we deal with a lot with the developer land, and particularly when we've got our large, big high-rise developments in Brisbane City and the Gold Coast, and then our big land developments. It's something that a lot of the developers request the buyers to actually pay the land tax on, but because the contracts can be 120 pages, it's often buried, at page 60 on 120, so it's not something people are aware of. So I found that this change was probably more like a buyer's disclosure, just trying to give that information to them up front. But the offset of that is most of those large developments, they don't use a standard form REIQ contract anyway. So it's really not going to change things for those guys anyway.
So another change, not as big as the other two, is the warranties with the body corporate. So do you want to walk us through the changes to the warranties?
The warranties are a hard one because if we're going to talk about it from practice, very rarely were they ever filled in anyway, because it was very difficult for people to try and find out where they would get the information from or even understand actually what was in it as well. So I feel like from a practical level, often this may still be uncompleted because a lot of agents and sellers just don't understand the information that needs to go in there. Having said that, because of the new disclosure regime that we've got and the information we're going to get from the body corporate that gets attached to that, a lot of the information that's in these warranties potentially may come across in that form. So there may be extra information that the agents now can complete in this form. So the extra ones that have come in have been some around unimproved improvements on common property. So this obviously would catch that someone's gone and put a garden shed on the common property that the body corporate didn't approve. That one's a bit tricky because a lot of times people's yards are technically like exclusive use areas, which are common property, and that could get a little bit complicated.
Particularly in the smaller units.
Particularly in your smaller units, that's right. So that is one to watch. If people do have those structures that they have built themselves, then it may be something that they should be completing in this form.
So there's been some changes to the body corporate warranties. Do you want to walk us through those changes?
These are always a hard one anyway, because I feel like I very rarely see a contract where it had information actually included on this because a lot of times to get that information the seller would have to do a full boarding record search, and they often just didn't have the information or pass it on to the agents anyway. So this wasn't something that we very rarely completed anyway. So I think from a practical level, that's probably not going to change. Not saying it shouldn't be completed, of course, it definitely should be, but from a practical level, this information ever wasn't the simplest to complete or the simplest to understand anyway. With that seller's disclosure stuff that's come in now, and the information we'll get from the body corporate, we will get a little bit more information that we can use to complete this anyway. Having said that, I know that we were talking before that if you get it wrong, what the buyer's rights are, and I think, Lloyd, you had some comments on that one.
Yeah, so the buyer's rights in relation to the information contained within the contract will only be a warranty claim for the first 14 days of the contract period. So the buyer's got to raise an issue with it and potentially terminate if they're materially prejudiced within that time frame, but it's not all the way up until settlement like it would be with the information contained in the disclosure statement.
So just refresh, materially prejudiced, what does that mean?
So materially prejudiced, they're affected by something on the property, which means that they wouldn't have bought the property if they were aware of it before they sign the contract.
Even if they get compensation?
Even if they get compensation.
Yep. So the extra warranties that have been added in are things around unimproved improvements on common property. We've got comments on if they're contravening the bylaws. So there's a couple of extra questions in there that the agents will actually be asking the sellers when they're listing the property. So one example of the unimproved improvements might be if they've gone and put a shed up on what's actually classed as common property and haven't got body corporate approval for those ones.
Or council approval.
Or council approval, that's exactly right.
So,
the bylaw contravention one, that may come up if you've got someone who, for example, has got a pet and they're not complying with the standard things. They're supposed to have it on a leash or be reasonable about it, and they're not. The body corporate's been issuing them notices about it and they're failing to comply. But again, I think those things are going to be fairly rare in most of your body corporates, or again, the seller should be aware of that information and be able to easily disclose it.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I like about the changes is they've actually put in a records inspection day.
Yes.
How's that work?
I thought that was quite a good change actually that came in. So it's now just an option for the buyers to actually do a records inspection, very similar to what you would do with a building and pest or anything like that. So you just would be putting in a 7, 14, 21 day term in there to allow the buyer to go and actually inspect all the records of the body corporate and make sure they're happy with it. If you don't complete it, the same as your finance and building and pest, it's just not subject to it. But I do think this is a good thing because some people are very nervous about buying in body corporates, and it does just give them that time to obviously check the bylaws and to check the last minutes of the meetings and all of those things to make sure that there isn't anything outstanding that's happening.
Get further records, particularly if they're buying in a body corporate where it potentially had some skeletons in the closet previously, and they just want to make some inquiries as to what was in there beforehand. So.
Yeah, I agree, because previously they could do a body corporate records inspection search, and if they found something they didn't like, then to get out, they had to go back to the warranties. So it was a breach of the warranties, and it had to be within 14 days.
Or try and rely upon the disclosure statement being incorrect. And
whereas now, if there's bylaws like pets or something like that, and they have a pet and it's not going to comply, they go, we're not satisfied.
We want out.
We want out, yes.
And I mean, realistically, most of our contracts are going to be subject to finance, building on pest or other conditions anyway. And it's not a cost that the sellers are going to have to. It's completely up to the buyer. Buyer pays for it. The buyer's got to go and do it. And so including an extra condition, to me, it's not cumbersome. It's not difficult. They still had other ways out of the deal anyway if we've got other conditions in there. So to me, it's handy for buyers to do this.
So overall, you think the changes are good?
I love the fact that it's all on one contract. I think that's going to be really good. The GST and the land tax changes, that's going to cause a bit of angst, I think, for people to start with until they really get used to it and understand that on the majority of our residential matters, it's not going to be an issue. But once we've got through that first, month, then I love the fact that it's on in one contract.
What's your opinion on
Yeah, no, I agree. The changes are, I guess, just enough. I was like, everyone sort of will, as I said at the start, everyone will have a bit of a freak out of this because it looks substantially different. But I think the changes are worthwhile, and there's definitely a reason behind it. And if we're bringing everyone together and getting used to the same sort of form, it will make it easier from not only from an agent's perspective, but also from like a conveyancing perspective, so that everyone knows what they're referring to. And I guess in terms of that, the standard terms, while they look a fair bit different, there's only a few new clauses that have been introduced. The old REIQ contract is substantially the same, it's just been reordered. So it is one of those ones where everyone's going to have a bit of a thing to get their head around, but I think it was needed, and we're all going to be on one contract moving forward.
I think what's important to note though too, of course, is that the seller's disclosure comes in the 1st of August, the new contracts come in the 1st of August, but at the end of the day, it's not mandatory for us to use these contracts as well from the 1st of August, where of course it's mandatory for us to be complying with seller's disclosure. So again, if people are still comfortable using the old 19th editions and those things moving forward, they can do that. We don't have to be panicked about doing all new contracts on the 1st of August. You're just not getting the benefits and the changes that are included in there.
And that's a good point, Bethel. I don't think agents need to panic.
No.
There's going to be a leeway where they can get comfortable with the new contracts and start using them. So I think that's a very good point.
Particularly then it's not a lot all on the 1st of August. With seller's disclosure and new contracts, which is a lot. But obviously if they're ready to roll, then that's great. So.
Well, Bethel, Lloyd, thanks for coming in and
thanks for having us.
Chat with me
Thank you.
on Property Chat.
All right. Thanks, Roland.
Thank you.